communities. Um, with that being said, many corporations are, on a brighter note, right? Many corporations are being proactive. You're seeing a lot of leading delivery companies like your FedEx, UPS, Walmart, Zacchaeus make zero emission delivery shipping commitments. You may be familiar with like EV100 or the Drive to Zero program. So there's also national campaigns that are pushing for zero emission or electric vehicles and within that last mile of the shipping. But I will say, there's a lot of blanket statements out there, so we just have to hold those companies accountable, which is some of the work that I do at EDF on the Plus Business team.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to Laila next. Talk about, what she's seeing in her community with warehouses and traffic and impacts and concerns from community members.
So the development that we're experiencing started pre-pandemic, but I will tell you everything in our area is positioning for what is believed to be an increase in the last mile delivery in warehouses as a response to the pandemic. We are about to receive complete construction on an Amazon facility just outside our municipality, as well as another last mile warehouse facility on the other side of our small 1.5 square mile municipality. So in a municipality of 6,500 people, that's 2 warehouses immediately in the area. And then from there, we also have the displacement of something that should actually be in Washington, DC, circulator buses going to be housed in our community, just outside our municipality again. So what this means, we also are bisected and surrounded by highways, Route 50, Route 295, Route 202, all of these that are heavily laden with truck traffic. And the idea in Route 295 of actually opening it to truck traffic by turning it over and making it not a parkway, but instead a state highway, and the aggressive push for that, which will bring tractor trailers to that location as well. In all of these, we're talking adding 500 employee trips for the Amazon facility, 300 van trips for the Amazon facility. I think about 27, I can go back and check, about 70 some buses coming in from DC. And then we're looking at an additional 500 with other warehousing. And we're also looking at an industrial zoned area where there is no desire by county officials, by planning board to take a fresh look at that area. And this is an area that has been really everything has been placed in this area that has raised more and more concerns about environmental injustice in our area, and economic justice issues as well, because you're always faced with the response when you protest the impact to the air, when you're talking about public health concerns. But of course you want this employment, and we're bringing employment. If you turn us away, you're saying that you're not really looking to provide employment to your residents and to your community. So you have those layers of impact. And in addition to that, one of the things that we will be facing, and I'll talk about more later, is you can make all the promises in the world, but if people aren't going to follow up on the regulations and do the proper inspection, we're setting a course for great disappointment and great negative impact on communities. So we're going to have 2 more coming through as well. And this is all happening since 2020.
Wow, thank you for that, Mayor Riazi.
Former Mayor,
Laila, I'm sorry, former Mayor. And just for the audience, and we'll get into this, I'll wait to say that later. Shelley, can you speak to this issue as it relates to the work that y'all are doing? Are you experiencing this? Are you seeing this as an issue? How is this challenge something that, as it relates to the warehouse and this traffic, this big truck traffic, something that are y'all engaging in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So one of the things that happened with our organizations and our team, being that we have folks on the team with that public health lens. When the pandemic really started kicking off, one of the things, and Dr. Wilson, I think you and I even had a conversation about this early on at the onset of the pandemic, was that we were thinking about who's going to be most impacted worse than first by the pandemic. It's no surprise that it's going to be frontline, rural, indigenous communities, Black and brown folks, because we were already experiencing disproportionate impacts and burdens of exposure to transportation emissions due to, the historical inequities, the systemic equities, such as gentrification, redlining, and a host of other isms. So just thinking about that, and then, thinking about what is facilitating this what we're seeing, we know is transportation emissions. And there was a really good study that came out in April by Science Advances that looked at how different segments of racial and multicultural communities, what types of pollution they're most exposed to. And specifically for African Americans, medium heavy duty trucking and freight was a significant problem. And so obviously what we know is that long haul freight truck electrification could significantly reduce climate impacts and health damages, but it's going to require multi-sectoral partnerships, so public-private partnerships, as well as incentives or fines potentially for these organizations or these corporations that are facilitating these goods through Black and brown community without any immunity or any charges. And so the research is very consistent in terms of the pollution advantage and disadvantage with people who are living in predominantly white neighborhoods. They have a lower exposure to air pollution, whereas if you're living in a majority or predominantly Black or Latinx community, they are faced with the disproportionate burden. And so there's no reason in this day and age that 70% of African Americans should be living in communities where they are disproportionately overexposed to transportation emissions. The work that we do, we're doing work from both an advocacy aspect, grassroots engagement. So we're talking to different communities that are in these populations, in these neighborhoods where the heavy duty medium freight are coming through, and talking with them in terms of how can we align resources and support to try to get this addressed. So one of the things obviously is like working with the corporations, working with transit authorities. One of our projects is we're working with the 25 largest metropolitan cities across the United States on the American Climate Challenge. And so we're working with the cities to inform their electrification strategies and make sure, one, that the community voice is front and center in helping to drive the solutions. And two, that we're actually making tangible plans and strategies, putting things in place to remove some or mitigate some of these transportation burdens. So we're doing things such as working with, say, the city of Orlando to change their fleet, to remove the diesel fossil fuel bearing buses that are particularly going through these high, going through African American, Latinx communities that are, are facing all kinds of climate and pollution challenges. So replacing that transportation with clean transportation, looking at how we can utilize multimodal transportation, make walking and biking much easier for communities, because what we recognize is that all communities don't need to be or may not be prepared to get electric vehicles. So we really have to meet people where they are and look at what their transportation burdens and gaps and needs are as we try to really facilitate and ramp up this conversation. And the last thing I will add is that when a company say, and Amazon, they've started to make the commitment in terms of how they are transitioning their fleet. They've pledged to purchase 100,000 light duty trucks to do their deliveries from Rivian, which is a leading clean transportation OEM manufacturing company. And so they've already started to pilot these pilot these delivery vans in communities as of the beginning of the year. So we're going to continue to see like the transportation paradigm transition, but we really, like Carol and my other colleague Elizabeth said, we have to hold these corporations responsible for the solution that they're helping to facilitate, because they do need to transition, because this is a life and death matter for many communities, and we just can't stand idly by and let things continue to to happen as oh, this is just another day in the world of, shipping, freights, and manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. It's really important that we understand this issue of goods movement, like what y'all are talking about. So, for everyone who's participating in this session, we're talking about any goods that come into the country. You have the Panama Canal, you have Suez Canal, you have, ships bringing goods. I always like to say, they take them to ports, like our coastal ports or seaports. I like to say that any movie that you watch, particularly an action movie, there's always a port scene, y'all. And y'all may not recognize, it's always in the background. You got the flyover, you may have the big explosion, you may have the big final fight. I'm an action guy. Most of my most exciting movies, there's a port scene. But those ports are places where you got a lot of goods movement, right? And then they take those goods and put it on, rail and putting on big trucks, as we're talking about. And then as Harold mentioned, you have dry ports, these huge warehouses. And as Laila mentioned, you have those huge warehouses in her community, right? So that's goods movement. And then as consumers, we are a part of that, right? And so you have these impacts of the truck traffic, of the diesel exhaust, the black carbon, what we call traffic-laden air pollution. So you got those truck traffic, those trips in and out of those facilities and the overall burden on those communities. So I want to get to, when you think about this goods movement and air quality issues, what types of data are folks collecting? What are some of the actions or approaches people are taking? You may be taking, communities taking to collect data on the impacts. And how can communities, get involved and be involved in collecting data on looking at the impacts of these warehouses, the impacts of goods movement, the impacts of truck traffic on air quality and also on human health. So I'm gonna start with former Mayor Laila first.
Thank you. And as you know very well, Dr. Wilson, in our community, one of the things that you have been helping us with is hyperlocal air quality monitoring. The idea is, can we be part of gathering the information necessary to understand what's happening in our communities when it comes to air quality? And then also being able to take that information, and as the trust improves in what this information can provide, in our case, working with Maryland Department of the Environment, so that they can see what's happening and they can then go in and do inspections and do the enforcement that's necessary when there are violations of letting vehicles idle, other things that bring them to take a closer look at the operations in our area. The other thing that we have been doing is really addressing and gathering data on how much forest is removed, how many trees are removed. And here we're talking about electrification, we're talking about the impact of warehouses, but warehouses snarf up space. And more often than not, those spaces can be urban forests. And when that happens, the effect on the air quality in the area is significant, to both lose that while you're adding the warehousing and the big vehicles in, small vehicles out. The other thing that we've been looking at as a community throughout all this process is general traffic. And traffic is an issue in of itself, but when traffic gets to the point where vehicles are idling, that you have 15 minutes at a light, these sorts of things, that increases that level of impact. And the other thing is how we look at each warehouse, not only in the truck traffic, but also in how is that development, how is that business supporting the transportation of their employees? So really driving that there needs to be investment in bringing people through public transportation, the incentives, dedicating shuttle service, and doing more of a transportation demand management approach, not just for your high-end business and residential development, but thinking of your industrial areas as absolutely critically important to be transportation demand management in those areas.
So thank you, thank you. Let's go to Harold next. Like just engage in the community, you collecting data, what examples are out there. I know you've done some work in different communities, particularly in Oakland, West Oakland. So can you speak to that, please, for our audience, sir?
Sure. So EDF and has really kind of coined this term of hyperlocal air pollution monitoring networks. And what I should emphasize is that, conventional air pollution sensors aren't evenly distributed across communities. And when I say conventional, I mean, regulatory monitoring networks, your FEMs, FRMs, EPA Health Department monitors. And the numbers are actually for every 60% of individuals that live in urban centers in the US, there's 2 to 5 monitors per million people, right? So what does that mean? That means that literally, if you download the air quality index on your phone today from the EPA, I'm almost certain that the closest regulatory monitor is probably miles away from you. That means that your exposure inhalation dose is not reflective of, again, emissions scenarios that may be presented by your local regulatory body. With that being said, EDF has really partnered with groups in West Oakland, Houston, Texas region, and New York and New Jersey. And Ms. Margaret isn't on, but she is one of our local champions and lead advocates on the work in West Oakland. But again, it is to establish these neighborhood-based census tract urban air quality sensing networks to help tell that data story. That means, literally at 30 to 60 meters within a community, looking at hourly, daily, monthly air pollution patterns, and really encompassing low-cost monitors in these sensing networks. For those who may not work in the air quality space, and Sacoby, let me know if I'm getting too into the weeds, but you have your low-cost sensors that could run you from $100 to $1,000, and those regulatory reference grade monitors that I alluded to earlier can run you from $10,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So low-cost sensors have really, medium-cost sensors, low-fidelity sensors have really pervaded the current sensor market because it allows you to fill gaps into those existing networks. I should emphasize that regulatory monitors will be the gold standard, right? But what you can literally do is co-locate low-cost sensors with your reference monitors. That means working with your local DEP, working with your local EPA region representative, positioning 5 or so low-cost monitors over the week or a month or a year, literally meters away from a federal monitor, and you have correction algorithms that will correct for those errors in the data. And then this feeds out and spits out to the cloud. So now your network is representative of some of those reference monitors. I kind of rushed through that because I didn't want to get too into the weeds, but essentially we've seen that in a lot of communities. In West Oakland, Port community has worked closely with a lot of academics as well as the West Oakland's Environmental Indicators Project to do a mobile monitoring campaign in that community for a full year. Mobile monitoring, as it alludes to, working closely with like Google Earth Street View and Alclima to install reference monitors on vehicles, right? So now you have vehicles that kind of do routine passes over a course of a full year, collecting data on black carbon, PM, and NOx in this community. We followed up that study with health records from Kaiser Permanente that actually looked at things like cancer and cardiovascular risk, and actually showed that air pollution was 8 times higher than the local regulatory monitoring site. Again, using that granular data, driving in the actual streets, we saw an 8-time order of magnitude higher pollution event. Moving forward, I'll just mention that EIP was instrumental in that policy process, working with the port to actually divert traffic from some of those more residential communities to industrial zones, doing things like increasing signage near the ports, being instrumental in the AB 617 legislation and being one of those first communities funded as an air quality management district or as a community in the air quality management district. And it's great. And I wish, again, Ms. Margaret was here because she could speak to it much better than I, but it just really speaks to the importance of these local champions and citizen science in some aspect and how I can really tell this story. The last point I'll add, I'm at about 2 minutes here, is there's tons of work around actual warehouses and transportation. right? I've seen work in Inland Empire where you're literally doing, and even in New York and New Jersey, where you're literally doing truck counting studies, right? Where you're at an intersection or at an entry or exit point at a port and counting and installing air pollution monitoring networks at these facilities and attributing it to truck traffic. There's tons of work around literally using like satellite imagery, coming in with the NASA data and overlaying that with different locations, and some fun work around like participatory GIS, where in this more charrette form, you're working with community-based groups to ground truth various maps and identify different phenomena on the ground as a result of air pollution exposure events. So I'll leave it there and kind of pass the mic.
Yeah, thank you for that. And for those who are attending, Harold spoke about these hyperlocal air quality monitoring networks, and he talked about sparse monitoring networks. To add to that point about the EPA monitors, I think the whole system is actually a poorly built system, in my opinion, because many of those monitors are actually not in areas where people are dealing with the cumulative impacts of air pollution hazards. So to me, you actually had bad science that leads to bad policy. And environmental health, we call it exposure classification. You have a monitor, as Laila mentioned in the chat, her community is in Cheverly. The nearest FRM, Federal Reference Method monitor, is in Beltsville. How many miles away is that? 20? About 20 miles away. How is that going to be useful data when it comes to permitting facility that's right next door to my house, 20 miles away? And so we have better technology. We have better approaches. Harold mentioned satellite data. We also have mobile monitoring methods out there. I'm on the EJ advisory board for Aclima that does mobile monitoring. They actually get block by block level data. And they've shown that work in California, other parts of the country, 10, 30, 100 times more higher levels of pollutants compared to the reference method. So basically what we're saying is the current system is a dinosaur system and has not been responsive to the needs of those who are overburdened by air pollution hazards, whether it be stationary sources of warehouses or the truck traffic, the mobile sources associated with those warehouses. So we got to do better. Shelley, are y'all using any of this kind of data? Are y'all engaging with communities and sort of collecting air quality data to inform your work in this area? What are your thoughts?
So I'll lean in here. So we have not, collected this type of data yet, but that's not to say that that's not something that is in our strategic plan. We have some colleagues that are really doing some interesting things, and so I wanted to just touch on 3 points in relation to thinking about this particular question. So first, you talked about the exposure misclassification. I actually was going to touch on that and say that has been a challenge in working with Black and Brown communities in terms of how the air quality is being measured. So is it being measured at the ground level? Is it being measured at a more elevated height? And so what we found in some of the recent peer-reviewed studies is that there's misclassification in terms of if you're measuring at the ground level. There's a recent study out of East Harlem that the community found that the way the state was measuring and monitoring air quality was very different. And the community found that when it was measured properly at the ground level, the pollution rates were 20 times worse than what the state was measuring. So obviously there's a disconnect there, and then there needs to be better data captured, as you were saying. In order to have better data, you need resources to capture that data. So recently, I think it was the end of July, maybe around the 28th, 27th, Senator Markey, who is the chair of the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee, he and his colleagues introduced a bill that would authorize about $100 million annually to establish pilot programs that would support funding air quality monitoring projects in environmental justice communities. So that way, as part of this program, community partners, so state, local, tribal communities and agencies will be able to partner with local agencies and nonprofits to make sure that the air quality data providers and data capture methods were in alignment with best practice. And it really goes to having community be engaged as part of this process. Another good example of actual community engagement around this issue is Dr. Osborne Jelk. I don't know if many of you are familiar with her work. She's a faculty member down at Southern College, but she's partnered with faculty at Georgia Tech to do some air monitoring work that is really fascinating. So they're partnering with different community members, residents, agencies, and they're actually training them, which is phenomenal, training them to be kind of data scientists. They're the data street team. And so they're going through communities at their communities at specific times of the day as part of their, their protocol, and they're measuring temperature. And so they're finding that the urban heat islands that Dr. Wilson likes to talk about, and that the hot pockets within communities to identify where these pockets are, so then we can be informed about making recommendations on, hey, we need to make sure that the transportation methods that are coming through these communities are clean, and it's an opportunity to really inform what multimodal electrification looks like, or medium heavy duty freight looks like in these communities that are identified as hot spots. And so it's really, really fascinating work. I want to see more of those types of projects, and we would love to be engaged in activities like that, given that we're working with community partners around the country. So really excited about the types of project and innovation, and just, I just love the centering community as part of this process, because it's just so core social justice, activism, and public health, at its best.
No, thank you for that. Just to follow up on a few points that you made. That Markey bill, is trying to fund hyperlocal air quality monitoring and communities with EJ issues. I think it's pivotal, as you said. It builds somewhat off of the AB 617 California, which was passed to have these pilot projects for community-based air quality monitoring. And the reason why it's important to highlight this, everyone, that's a different way to do monitoring. As we said, the monitoring that's been done right now is not responsive to the needs of communities, particularly those that are on the front line, the fence line, who are dealing with the cumulative impacts of stationary sources, again, whether it be under Clean Air Act permitted major and minor sources, and also mobile sources. And Rachel, if you get a chance, could you please drop the press release for that Markey bill into the chat? Also, under the Biden administration, there's been some new monies. The EPA has gotten a lot of money recently. I think, let's be honest, I think the EPA got money this year for environmental justice, more money they got from environmental justice in the history of money they got from environmental justice, which is kind of sad because I'm on the inside, being an outgoing member. Actually, my last NEJAC meeting was actually yesterday. So I was on NEJAC for 6 years, so now I've graduated off of NEJAC. But it was 6 years, but we learned like they got a lot of new money. And so as part of that new money, there's going to be a lot of focus on air quality. The Office of Air and Radiation is having a lot of focus on environmental justice and air quality, right? So you have this issue of, think about it again, you have highways and byways built through communities, many Black and brown communities, as Shelley talked about. Some of that's due to redlining, segregation, National Highway Defense Act, urban renewal. So some of you may know about that. But that's like basically, forms of environmental injustice, right? And then you have this stacking of these industrial hazards, what we call locally wanted land uses, around these industrialized areas. So you have multiple pollution sources, stationary sources, and also lots of truck traffic. So what are the pollutants of concern that people have been impacted by? When you combust fossil fuels, we talk a lot about climate change and those greenhouse gases. They are very, very important. But when it comes to public health, we're talking about those co-pollutants. So we're talking about particulate matter, PM10, PM2.5, PM1. That's the dust in the air. This the 2.5, 10, and 1 means microns in diameter. So the smaller it gets, the deeper it can go, right? Impact your lung sacs, get into your circulatory system, cause asthma attack, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, birth defects, low birth weight, infant mortality, impact your blood pressure, cause cancer, right? Cause premature mortality, impact life expectancy. That's just particulate matter. Then you got nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen oxides, right? You got sulfur dioxide, right? Then you have things like volatile organic compounds, that new car smell, which you should not inhale, right? These are combustion byproducts. Then you have secondary products like ozone that's produced from all those things. So if you're living in a community with a lot of traffic, particularly industrial traffic, you're going to impact the truck-load air pollution. It's impacting your health. And then if you think about big trucks and they burn in diesel fuel, we got something called diesel particulates, something called black carbon. Black carbon is not regulated like particulate matter is, but it's as dangerous, right? there's I think 40 different constituents of black carbon that can cause cancer. So if you got a lot of big trucks, buses going through your community, you've been exposed to black carbon too. So you get exposed to chemical mixture. And basically the EPA does not have the science to actually reflect your exposure burden. That's the deal, right? And all these, so you got a huge air quality burden on folks, which is impacting human health, which is impacting quality of life, which is impacting opportunity too, y'all. So I just think I just want to say that. God, since Margaret's not here, I'm gonna talk a little bit more. But no, just want to add that in. And then so let's go kind of to the, let's go to the next question. Let's go to the next question. So we talked about electrification a little bit. I want to dig into it a little bit more, but 15 states, including California, Maryland, District of Columbia, are currently working collaboratively to advance electrification for medium and heavy duty vehicles, with a goal of 100% of all new truck and bus sales being zero emission vehicles by 2050. What impact would this widespread electrification push have on communities impacted by traffic-related air pollution? Is this initiative enough? I like to say, y'all, that electrification is a public health solution. That's one of my things I've been saying, y'all, for the last year or two. Okay, so I'm gonna pass the mic. So I'm gonna go to Harold first. Go ahead, Mr. Harold.
Sure. Yeah, that's a this is a great question, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate a bit and then say that there's two sides to the coin, right? There's clear pros to, and I often try my best not to say zero emission vehicles, right? But near zero or zero tailpipe emissions. We talked about the impacts on transportation in communities and frontline communities. So again, less diesel, less particulate matter, less NOx from electric vehicles is obviously a clear benefit for any community. But on the other side of that, in the literature, you see where, brake and tire wear emissions aren't negligible, right? So in a case where maybe we're pushing for more EVs, in some communities, does that mean more traffic? Does that mean more congestion? And inadvertently, more brake or tire PM. Also, there's clear connections to the grid, right? Where 100, 200, 300 EVs, medium and heavy duty EVs in California doesn't look the same as 100 EVs in a West Virginia or Texas, right? What I mean by that is California grid mix is largely renewable, right? Where in the case of a West Virginia or Texas, you have a mix of fossil fuels from coal-based power plants to natural gas. So is the initiative enough? I'll say it's not, right? Because there's complementary kind of policies that should be in place to support this transition. And it should be a conversation alongside a lot of the energy utilities, right? This is a very important stakeholder to make sure that the grid can support the transition, as well as making sure that there's a workforce in place to sustain the vehicles themselves. But at the state level, many policymakers are advocating for what's called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which sets deadlines for truck companies to start transitioning their fleet to electric vehicles. In the California region, the South Coast Air Quality Management District passed the Warehouse Indirect Source Rule, or ISR, which is, as it sounds, says that there's more pollution than just a warehouse, right? But it stems from the day-to-day operations of that warehouse facility. So trucks enter and exiting the premises of those manufacturers, or where the manufactured goods are transported. So putting emphasis on local and state policies, but also emphasizing the importance of those hyperlocal monitoring networks, right? If there are air pollution monitors in place, you won't be able to establish that baseline and look at the background concentrations and identify if the reductions made sense, or if they happened, or if there's some clean air kind of data to action pathways that are positioned, are in place. And then lastly, on the federal landscape, which Dr. Wilson alluded to, we're seeing a lot of funding, right, on EJ, whether that's through Justice 40 initiatives, a lot of the COVID relief funds, the more recent infrastructure bill. That's important. it's a suite of different federal goals to accelerate zero emission transportation. The EPA's rigorous multi-point pollution standard for new freights and trucks and buses is significant, but we also have to call on those corporate leaders, right? And which I spoke to earlier. And then lastly, and certainly not least, we need the community involved, right? Community engagement is very important. There's a magnitude of different health disparities across geographic regions, and this just underscores the importance of incorporating that local data, the hyperlocal data, and really using the expertise or lived experience of community residents.
Let's go to Laila next, please.
So I'm going to take this from a slightly different perspective. And one thing would be as development comes into your communities, the trick is knowing about it with enough time to do something about it. And most structures of notification and community involvement leave a great deal to be desired. You always feel like everything has been approved before you see it as a community. And so I encourage just that piece of knowledge. The next thing is we were very successful in having conversations with the developer, Prologis and Amazon, about them committing to running everything so that they are ready for an electric fleet. And that shouldn't just be a conversation with Amazon. It should be a conversation with each and every warehousing development that comes into communities. What are you doing to future-proof or prepare your warehouse so that it is ready for an electric fleet? And so often when you have this conversation, there's just a blank. It is not part of the formula because they will only do something when they're up against it. And I think that needs to be part of each and every discussion. The other thing that I mentioned before is it is not just the vehicles, it is the operation of the site. And when we think about this and we think about neighboring communities that can wipe the dust off of their windowsills several times a day. When the incidence of asthma within communities has skyrocketed, what Dr. Wilson was saying as far as blood pressure, all of these things that tell us that they are subject to an amount of pollution that is really increasing their day-to-day harm. We have to address that. So electrification of the fleet has to be important, but it's all the other things of the operation. And then also really making the tough call when you look at an area that has been subject to heavy industrial development, that at some point there needs to be funding put toward stopping the development in that area. We're not going to be able to work ourselves entirely out of this problem despite any technology fixes, because when we go and we're removing the tree canopy, mature forests in those areas, they will not return. And there are several properties, I would say, in our industrial area that the county needs to commit and put funding forward for preservation of that land, and that it is not subject to heavy industrial development. And that's a conversation that nobody wants to have, but it's a critical conversation in communities that have repeatedly been subjected to, as I say, heavy industrial development. Not even the electrification will fix that.
Yeah, you got to have the ability to say no. So that's been, I think, part of the problem with these permitting agencies, transportation agencies. They put businesses, pollution intensive businesses first before the people, before public health. So thank you for that.
It means that we need to invest funds in stopping that development and the fair purchasing, whatever is necessary in that case, because we can say it, but unless we're going to put the funding into it, it just plain isn't going to happen.
It's funding, it's running, it's having different people get elected, different people in the executive's office, different people on county council, different people in the mayor's office, different people on these commissions and agencies at the local level. All right, go. So Shelley, do you have any thoughts about electrifications, talking about how, what the role EVs have in this whole complex, changing this whole ecosystem we're talking about?
I do. So I obviously think, it can have a huge impact because, as we've stated so articulately throughout this panel, is that communities of color are suffering, and they're suffering from traffic-related air pollution. Transportation emissions is killing us. It's killing infants, it's killing the elderly, and everybody in between. And so being able to transition to a multimodal clean transportation landscape would lessen particular health outcomes, reduce morbidity and mortality rates, would be able to lower the GHGs in the ozone. And we also have to think about it from the corporate landscape or the corporate lens, where this will be a major shift for corporate America in terms of thinking about fleet electrification and shifting away from fossil fuel preferred transportation methods. And so really, because we're at this kind of critical, paradigm shift basically around transportation, we have this urgency of now to be able to address some of these issues and mitigate the impacts that we're seeing. So some of the projects that we're working on or collaborating on with different partners, one of them is that we are actually working on a project that looks at electrification in the Mid-Atlantic region. So it's West Virginia, Columbia, in Maryland. And so we're doing what I call a top to bottom electrification strategy. So we're doing port electrification, airport, transit, mass transit, rail, light rail, buses, in terms of transit buses, school buses. We're looking at how rideshare electrification can be facilitated or looking at shared ride pilots. Part of this on the front end is doing that community engaged research that really helps set the tone for what's happening from the sociological and ecological standpoint, so that we can really hone in on the different social determinants of health that will help inform and refine the strategy. We're also working, as I'm sure that you probably saw last fall, that the major rideshare partners issued statements of commitments to electrify their fleets by 2030 or earlier in some instances. And so we're working with one of the rideshare organizations to help inform what their electrification strategy looks like. So we're advising them on what would be best practices in terms of really making sure that they're utilizing a human-centric approach so that they're centering the voices of the drivers. Because what we know from the data is that about 60% of the rideshare drivers represent people of color. So they're representing Black, Latinx communities. And then the rides, over 60% of the rides are starting and ending in those said communities and frontline communities. So they really have a lot to say and a lot to benefit and gain from that whole transportation paradigm shift. And so we have to think about that and make sure that their voices are centered, and we make it easy for them to make that shift, because they're not driving for Uber, Lyft, or other agencies because they're millionaires. They're driving to accelerate their economic stability, their entrepreneurship. So we need to make sure that we're creating a space where they can make a good living, but also do it in a way that has the minimal impact on communities. So that's one, a couple examples. And I think my last example is, again, going back to working with the cities across the United States. So with that 25 cities project, the cities are all at all different points of this electrification conversation. But some of the things that we're putting in place and working with the key stakeholders in the communities, obviously doing research, making sure that community residents as well as other key stakeholders are engaged in helping to inform the solutions, and they have continual voice and feedback as that process rolls out. And then also we're looking at infusing or crafting building codes, so EV readiness ordinances that are putting structure in place so that buildings for new construction, they're being built so that EV infrastructure can be installed. We're creating opportunities for EV charging hubs so that if you're a rideshare driver, if you're mass transit, if you're individual who has an electric vehicle or a scooter or a bike, that you have a place where you can charge safely, affordably, We're looking at deploying innovative charging infrastructure. And then all of this can't be done if EVs are not accessible or available or affordable. And people need to know about clean transportation options, whether they're walking, they're biking, or they're driving, or taking the bus. So we're really just, again, it's not trying to push a particular, everybody has to get EVs. It's really meeting communities where they are, working collaboratively with all key stakeholders so that we can make communities better, but we're also really crafting tangible solutions that the community is saying that they want and that they need. So really, there's so many multiple levels and phases to this that it's really quite fascinating, but I think it always comes back to those folks who are closest to the issue and the challenges, really making sure that they're helping to really drive or help facilitate the solutions. And Ms. Gordon is here, yes.
Yes, thank you for that, Shelley. And I think just to add, we're in a moment right now where you have infrastructure dollars that are coming down that's very related to this conversation. And so, how we have the Justice 40 initiative, you have President Biden's executive order on climate change, you have this racial equity, executive order. So I think you have some important stuff, some opportunities there, particularly make sure communities' voices are heard in this process. And then you can have real impact, and the folks in the front line, fence line are getting those opportunities. So Ms. Margaret's here. We got 6 minutes left. So Ms. Margaret, I'll let you talk and close us out. Because
good morning, everybody.
Yeah, we're gonna have to close out at 2:10 to get to our next sessions. But go ahead and just talk about the work you're doing and how how you've been engaged in this issues of goods movement and air quality. And what do you see for electrification? What do you see as the solutions to these issues?
Well, those who don't know me, my name is Miss Margaret Gordon. I am one of the founders and the co-director of a environmental justice organization that deal with air, water, soil, and research. And we're here in Oakland and the community of West Oakland. Our target for many years has been the Port of Oakland, which is like the 5th or 6th container port in the United States. Where I live at, I'm like about a mile from the port's activities itself, but we have the trucks running through this neighborhood 24/7. And I'm also just a block away from the entrance and the exit of the 880 freeway. So we are constantly dealing with truck traffic, but as cumulative impact, because we're so close to the Port of Oakland, so we're still dealing with the ships, trains, trucks, cargo handling equipment. And also, West Oakland is surrounded by this community is surrounded by 3 freeways. The update is that we have fought with the city and the Port of Oakland by filing a Title VI complaint, administrative complaint 2 years ago. So now they all want to be buddy, friendly with us now on all their projects that they want to produce. But we have thrown a lot of monkey wrenches into their process by keep putting the issue of emission reduction and electrification on all their projects and looking at green infrastructure. So we have really pushed hard, and finally there's some cracks in that ceiling to get them to do certain things, such as they have a new aggregate terminal that's coming in, and we have pushed them that all those ships and the trucks that would be hauling away the aggregate. If people don't know what aggregate is, that's like cement things that go make cement with, because we have such a housing boom, a building boom in the Bay Area. So we have pushed them for this particular terminal to have a green infrastructure, have ongoing disbursement of water, and plug in the ships as they come in, and using the port just signed a project of bringing in 30 electric trucks that will be used in the Port of Oakland area. We also have been pushing that one of the leasees that has the dealing with the trucks have charging stations for those trucks throughout throughout the port area. So then the last thing that I want to talk about, there's a major reconstruction of the tunnel area and within West Oakland that's connected to the port that we have pushed them to not only bring in the electric construction equipment, but also use those trucks also for doing hauling and also push the process, this project process that we have in green infrastructure. So those like some of the things that's happening in West Oakland regarding electrification. And plus we also have West Oakland under the state of California have this thing called AB 617, and which is that communities are being selected by the California Air Resources Board to do air monitoring and or doing an action plan around emission reduction planning. And our plan for emission reduction has a thread of electrification on anything from the city that's dealing with the city and with the port area. Okay. So we are very invested in electrification on everything.
Thank you. It's good to hear from Miss Margaret to say that, because going back to Shelley's points, you know, folks have been dumped on, right? And so this is a solution, and what y'all are hearing is it's a public health solution, but it's also an economic opportunity, a workforce development solution too. And so if folks are engaged in the frontline fence line, let's let them be the ones that drive what's happening with these policies. So I appreciate you being able to join on for the few minutes we were able to join, Ms. Margaret. It was powerful statement about this work. And just to let everybody know, Ms. Margaret is an icon in the EJ movement. I know we got this East Coast bias, but we're virtual, so we should have no coastal bias. But want to let y'all know, if y'all want to know about EJ, right? She's one of those folks been doing EJ work. I'm not gonna say for how long, Ms. Margaret, but been doing EJ work in community. So y'all should be learning from her. We should be learning from her. So thank you for joining. I thank everybody on this panel. We won't be able to get any questions in from the audience, and I apologize for I couldn't get on for something's going on with this Hoover site. So if you have additional questions, right, please email us. And we're going to try to figure out why we're still having technical issues. We've done a lot of work to fix them. Some stuff is still happening, but we're going to try to keep, troubleshooting that. But thank you again to the panelists. I'm going to give everybody a hand. I know we can't do like we do virtually. We appreciate all the knowledge from Harold, from Shelley, from Laila, and thank you, Miss Margaret, for closing us out like a closer, like you are. So thank you.
Thank y'all for having. Sorry, I'll be 75 this year, and it looked like the pandemic made me be more busy. Shelter in place made me be more busier than I was when I sit in my office every day. Okay, the Zoom meetings have been has been Zoom meetings, team, what is it, blue jean, and all those good things. I had no idea that that I would live long enough to be engaging with people on that based on this technology. But like I said, I'm very persistent. I just don't give up real quick.
That's right.
Miss Gordon, Miss Margaret, I'm going to be reaching out to you because I want to talk to you.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay, I know how to find you.
All right. And I want to say hi to Kim, Reagan. Miss you, girls.
Same here, Miss Gordon. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, everybody, and look forward to y'all
guys.
working together.
All right.
And and take your break and get to the next session starts. Next set of round of session starts at 2:20. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
All
Bye-bye.
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Gordon, should
Yes.
I email you? Is that, oh, can I actually, would it be okay for me? Well, actually, let me talk, if you have a minute and they don't cut us off.
Yeah, I have a minute.
Can I give you,